We're talking sidekicks. Sidekicks? Sidekicks? Not the hero. Not the guy we go out there and die to try to write a great one. We're talking about sidekicks? Yeah, because sidekicks are indispensable to your story. And not for nothing, they're also going to be the ones you probably enjoy writing the most, the characters you can take the biggest risk with, and many times they're going to be the character that people remember the most. So yeah, we're going to talk some sidekicks. So, where did this whole idea of a sidekick come from, anyways? Well, they actually started at the very beginning of storytelling. If you read Joseph Campbell, who did the hero's journey, he's the one who kind of looked at all the different storytelling traditions throughout history and realized that most of them were very, very similar, and that most of these stories had an ally character. This ally might be there to just basically serve as a sounding board for the hero's emotional and moral dilemmas, but they could often be there for comic relief, and many times they took up arms and fought alongside the hero. So the sidekick has a really long tradition. So let's look a little bit in pop culture and The Last Witch to see how sidekicks can be used in your story and what roles they can fill. So when you look at a sidekick, let's start with one of the archetypes, which is the sidekick that challenges the character. A good example of this is Sokka from The Last Airbender, who challenges Aang on his pacifism. Aang wants bad guys to just kind of realize that they're bad, and if he can reason with them, they'll get it. And Sokka kind of knows better. He knows, unfortunately, that sometimes you're going to need to fight. And Aang ultimately has to find a middle ground between what he sees as the best way to deal with an enemy and how sometimes you need to actually fight. Another good example of a character who challenges a hero in a bit of a different way is Donkey from Shrek. Donkey is constantly pushing against Shrek's belief that Shrek is nobody likes Shrek and Shrek likes nobody. And this is more than just a character thing. This is key to the plot, because when Shrek is activated and is believing in other people and in himself, he is a true hero and exactly what their world needs. And so Donkey isn't just there to be like, yeah, his cheering has a tangible effect on the story. To look at it through a different lens, let's go to comics and look at Foggy Nelson and Daredevil. Both Matt Murdock, who is Daredevil, and Foggy Nelson are lawyers, and Foggy Nelson is constantly pushing Daredevil to take a step back from his vigilante ways, not necessarily be a vigilante, but to not cross the line. Because while Matt Murdock sometimes becomes disenchanted with what the law can do, for Foggy Nelson, the law is important. And it's important because it is this magical thing that allows all of us a chance, whether we're rich or poor, to be able to state our case. And Foggy thinks that just can't be lost. It's a really wonderful moral perspective, and it's provided a lot of fodder for the comics, TV series, movies throughout the year. Similarly, you could look at Batman with Robin. Robin being another character who sometimes takes Batman to task for how grim and angry he can be. And because of that, both Batman and Daredevil end up being better people because of their sidekicks. This is not just about jokes. To switch gears, you could just choose to have a sidekick who is there for vibes, right? Let's look at Piglet with Winnie the Pooh. Low stakes stories, but Piglet is always up for good time. Piglet is always up to support Winnie the Pooh, and he's basically just there to make you feel good about yourself. You could also look at, say, Samwise Gamgee for a similar reason. Samwise is there to just support Frodo, really. There are a couple of moments in that story where he kind of challenges Frodo when Frodo is under the influence of the ring, but mostly Samwise is there to be good vibes. Jimmy Olsen's another great example of that, and Jimmy is a guy who, he'll do anything for Superman, right? He just wants to help. In fact, he'll do so much of anything that he even did this. Yep, that's Jimmy Olsen marrying an ape. I don't really understand why that happened. I got to be honest, I've never read that comic, but it's an all-time iconic cover. And then sometimes you get your trickster allies who in many ways seem like they're even bigger than the hero. And you would think that would be a really bad choice, right? Don't make your sidekick a bigger, more interesting character than the hero. Yet somehow one of the most iconic and charismatic actors of our generation has had that happen to him twice. Harrison Ford as Han Solo has Chewbacca, a 6'8" Wookiee who can rip your shoulders off, is bad-tempered, and is the biggest and most interesting character in any scene he's in. And then it happened to Han when he was also to Harrison Ford when he was in the Raiders of the Lost Ark with Short Round, who is physically the opposite of Chewbacca, but is also just a character who takes up all the great charisma in the room and steals every scene that's not nailed down. Of course, in Star Wars, Han does the same thing with Luke. He's a way more interesting character than Luke. So that's okay too. You don't have to worry about your sidekick ally character not being being more mousy than the main character. And that's because, of course, a lot of the very best sidekicks end up being their own main characters. You've got Robin turns into Nightwing. You've got Harley Quinn going and being a way more interesting villain / hero than the Joker ever was. And this is from someone who loves the Joker, right? You can see this time and time again. And you can also have a sidekick. Don't be afraid. Your sidekick can be more competent than your hero. Hermione Granger is a great example of this. There is really no reason whatsoever why Hermione couldn't be the hero of Harry Potter, except for the fact that Harry's the chosen one. Hermione is smarter, better at magic, just as brave, just as stubborn, and also kind of has a bit of a more of a better emotional head on her shoulders. So yeah, you don't have to be worried about that. But it is key that your sidekick plays a very specific role. And what that specific role is dictated by who your hero is. So using The Last Witch as an example, the hero in this book is 12-year-old Saoirse, who has just found out she can use magic, but that's after a coven of witches destroyed her village, killed her father, left her alone with just her bratty little brother and her cigar-smoking grandmother. And Saoirse carries a lot of frustration and anger, and she also needs to learn magic, which is why Nan, who is a sidekick character and maybe a bit of a mentor character, is important, because Nan is the one who can teach Saoirse how to use the magic. But she also provides an important emotional role in that she allows Saoirse to be angry. She allows Saoirse to feel the need for vengeance. And rather than telling her that those things are, not heroic, she just kind of tells her that is part of her and she might need to learn to control it, but that it is okay to be angry. Hugh, another character in the story, he's much more of a comic relief character. Saoirse can be very serious, and so I wanted to make sure I had a sidekick that could bring some laughter and levity while also filling a function for Saoirse. In this case, because Hugh's partially fairy, he can augment Saoirse's magic. But I would say the biggest sidekick in this story is Brom, her little brother. Brom is your classic little brother. He is a pain in the neck. He loves his sister dearly. He wants to be in all her business. At the beginning of the story, he's kind of the inciting incident in the sense that it's his choice to follow Saoirse and refuse to be sent home that ends up making everything go badly and ends up putting Saoirse on the quest to stop the Coven of Witches and to close this evil door. And Brom is important for a few different reasons. He, in some ways, fulfills the emotional needs of Saoirse. Her mother and father are dead. She needs someone who understands and knows who she is and who looks at her with unvarnished love. But that's what Brom is there for. But at the same time, Brom is willing to challenge her. He's the one where Nan says, hey, you know what? You're allowed to be angry. Brom's the one, though, who's trying to keep Saoirse from getting too angry because he recognizes how it's changing her and it frightens him. And Brom is also there to be his own low-key hero. He gets moments in this story where he is the one who drives the action, where he is the one who makes key choices that move the story along. And I think that's a key and an important thing with sidekicks. A sidekick can always be there as secondary and they can always just follow the hero's lead. Personally, I don't think that's interesting. I think you can do better in your story by sometimes letting your sidekick take the lead. The results can be hilariously bad and force the hero into an action they didn't want to take, or they can teach the hero something, or they can just allow the sidekick to also have a little bit of that big hero energy. So yeah, sidekicks. They're absolutely important, and you need to figure out, based on what your hero needs, what kind of sidekick is going to bring out the best in them, is going to help support them, and will also challenge them to make them a better person. If you enjoyed this video, please leave some comments below, and you can check in the description to get your copy of Book 1 of The Last Witch. Book 2 has started to come out. It just started coming out on June 18th. It's an amazing all-ages fantasy adventure story that I think is perfect for all readers, anybody who loves a lovely fairy tale, and people who like a good sidekick. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you later.